coming out to support the cause today. We really, really appreciate that. So, as I said, my name is Judith Denton, and I'm the founder of the Black Care Experience, and I'll also be your conference host today, and there'll be other people coming in to co-host with me as well throughout the day. The theme for today, as we've seen on our flyer, is changing our narrative together. Is love really enough? So today we'll be talking about finding solutions of how to improve the care outcomes and life chances for the current and next generation of Black children and young people in foster care and residential care. We know that the narrative says that we have, Black children and young people, we have the poorest outcomes and life chances in comparison to any other ethnic group in the care system. So what are we going to do about that today? We're going to ask ourselves and each other, is love really enough to change this narrative? Can it improve, can love, just love, improve the care outcomes and life chances of our Black children who are in the care system? We're going to ask ourselves as well, and each other, what does this love look like? We see love demonstrated through someone being kind, compassionate, unconditional, so there's no strings attached, and it's not incentivized. And we also see love as caring about somebody's welfare and their well-being. So we're going to ask ourselves and each other, have we experienced this love in our care journey? And if you work in children's social care as a social worker or a foster carer or any other part in children's social care, have you been able to demonstrate this love? We're also going to ask ourselves and each other, is this love really enough to help us heal and become who we're meant to become? We know the history started in the 1950s, where our West African children and babies were privately fostered out by their parents to white working class families. Then in the 1980s, there were some Black social workers and their allies who took a stand to help improve the care that we received. Then in 1984, a group of Black young people in care came together and formed what they called the Black and in Care group. They voiced their experience of how they were being cared for in relation to their hair, their skin, and their health. They raised their voices about how they were being disconnected from their culture. They raised their voices about experiencing racism whilst in children's social care, and that they weren't matched with people who understood them, who looked like them. I believe that this group impacted the Children's Act 1989, and this placed a legal duty on the local authorities to consider how to care for Black children in care. But 40 years later, fast forward to 2021, 22, 23, 24, we still see Black children and young people in care echoing the same experiences as they did in the 1980s. So where do we go from here? So today we're going to unpack and explore, where do we go from here? How can we make a change? And how can we make a difference for the next generation that will look like us? And what can the care system do better? Now today, as I said before, there will be some triggers, and there will be tears. There will be some uncomfortable moments and some uncomfortable conversations, and there will be silence. But there will be truth. And there'll be no judgment, but there will be respect. There'll also be culture, there'll be music, there'll be fun, there'll be laughter, there'll be joy, and there will be love in the room. The love that's kind, compassionate, unconditional, and the love that's caring. So take a moment and feel that. And then I'm going to ask you, are we ready? Are we ready?
Yes.
All right, let's go. Brilliant. So now we're going to work back and look at the history of the Black Care Experience. And we have with us, all the way from Spain, even though he used to live in the UK, a retired social worker by the name of Stephenson MBE. He's a trailblazer, an enduring campaigner, and an author. His campaigning successes include pioneering a widespread campaign in Birmingham in 1986 to recruit Black and Asian foster carers, shortly before the then 30-year-old social worker At the age of 30, he began challenging the city council's handling of race and equal opportunities. This was in Birmingham. Along with his team in Birmingham City Council, Steve was also strategic in developing black and cultural identity work. He offered solutions to the workforce on how to raise black children and young people in children's social care. Outside of social work, Steve has a long-standing history of supporting, I have no surprise, Jamaican and West Indian cricketers, putting on various functions for the West Indies team when they were in England. He is also well known as a community activist in a number of cities and towns across the country, including Birmingham, Bristol, London, Luton and Manchester. He's also written a book called Unbeaten Innings, and he was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and came to the UK in 1971, the year that I was born, so you can do the maths if you like. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to go in conversation with Stephenson MBE. Give him a round of applause.
My first job was to distribute posters in Answorth. This was 5 months after the uprisings, and no white social worker wanted to go in Answorth. In my team, the leader of the council's wife was in my team. They refused to go in, so I took off my tie and I went into Answorth on my own, got to the Black and White Cafe, saw some youngsters there who were deemed dangerous by the system. I says to them, I want you guys to help me distribute some posters. One of them turned to me and he said, I've got 3 girls in the high-rise flats around Lozells in Answorth. Do you want to take them in care? Despite the fact I was told that these guys could be deemed to jail, I looked him in the eye and I said, you're not joking, are you? I said, so I sat them down, about 12 of them, and I explained about the plight of black children in care. And this guy, they apologized to me for doing that. And then after that, I then had to convince managers to advertise in the black press. Garfield is here today, my old friend. And it was a struggle because we only had the West Indian World at the time, and the Cleaner, and we had Pride magazine. But they were saying it's too expensive. So the next thing I did in Birmingham, I developed a directory, which I will mention a bit more about during the interview. But this directory was very important. But everything that we remember, I'm talking about the 80s, and everything was a struggle at the time.
So, in your role as social worker race, you also launched, or trailblazed, I would say, a campaign to recruit black and Asian foster carers because of the transracial debate. Why did you see the need to do that? Why did you see the need to recruit black and Asian foster carers?
We had a campaign in the Bullwig in Birmingham, and at the time, I was the chair of Ebony Football Club in Luton, and we had the first black player. The 4th black player to play for England was Ricky Hill. So Ricky Hill was a special guest in Birmingham, and what we did, we had this large campaign in Birmingham where we did recruit a lot of black and Asian foster carers, because what was happening is that the children who were placed transracial at the time were racially black but culturally white, and they were denied the blackness as part of their coping mechanism. So we had to do something about it. That's why we had the campaign. And my daughter Simone, she had long hair then, so what happened, she was one of the models, and her ears were in plaits at the time. So we went into the community after the bull ring and start putting out posters and so on, because we felt that there was a lot of black people who wanted to foster, but at that time, the social workers in the team were using the Western model of marriage, and things like, you have to be married, you can't be single. There was a lot of barriers that were put up against the community, and we had to break down some of those barriers. So that's what we did, and we were very successful.
Brilliant. So the success story of how you recruited the black and Asian foster carers and how you came into social work is fantastic. But there were some also challenges that you faced as well that we spoke about. And it was, you actually mentioned it in your book. you said in your book that people in the Black Caribbean community used to make comments like, you can spot some of the children who are in care because their skin and their hair is usually a mess. How did this make you feel as a social worker?
This was very sad because it was not only the children in care, there was other children, and this was being said, and I repeated, when I was lecturing at the university, I repeated it. It didn't go down well at the time, but it was a fact. And I decided that I'd approach all the Caribbean West Indian barbers, hairdressers in the town. I went to see them. One guy had a factory with black hair products, and he was really happy that his business was going to be in the directory. So they were all in the directory. I went around with the bookshop and we got books. So we decided that we're going to have this directory, mainly for white foster carers and white social workers. And we developed the directory, but we came up against a barrier. The social workers were saying that the products are too expensive. I then put on my political hat and said, look, you have got one of the largest black populations in Europe, in Birmingham, and they have all paid the taxes and rates. So what is the problem? So they start buying the cocoa butter and buying the stuff for the children. So that's what really happened there. Yeah? But it was a sad situation because, for people to be saying that was not nice. And must also remember, the white carers at the time, they were doing their best. There were some excellent white carers that I worked with, and it wasn't their fault. It was the professionals' fault because they recruit these people without doing any what they call cultural competence work, any anti-racist work or anything. They didn't know about the history of the Caribbean, they didn't know the history of Africa, but they put these good people in a good position, so it wasn't their fault, you see, but we corrected it over time, but it took a long time.
So, with your perseverance, did you ever feel like giving up?
No, well, at times it was a struggle because it was 4 home-finding teams in Birmingham, and they weren't really accepting what was happening at all. We were in Answorth, in Newtown, in Birmingham, where it's a large black community on our doorsteps. So we had to do something. But fortunately for me, Dr. Carver Anderson joined the team, Rambia Baines joined the team. We ended up from being an all-white team to a team with 9 black and Asian social workers. And we were known as the radical team. We were too radical. So it was an endless battle.
And then you talked about the cultural identity work that you created for the black children in the care system. Tell everyone about that. Tell us about that.
What I'm gonna do with that, if you bear in mind,
yes.
I actually wrote a paper, Basic Guidelines and the Principle for Black Identity Work. And it looks like it's not out of date from what I'm picking up. But what it says here is that it is not generally accepted by most social service departments that the needs of black children are not adequately met. Many black children continue to deny their blackness and cultural heritage as part of their coping mechanism. Many children have poor self-image and a lack of racial identity. And I just read 2 of the statement and then go on to the identity work. In this, I said black children in the absence of positive black adults may not receive positive black role models and symbols. Positive black adults, I say, because it's not everybody in our community is positive, okay? Black children in the absence of positive black adults will lack appropriate support and survival skills which are necessary to withstand the racism which we will encounter in school, neighborhood and environment, and the wider society. And what I'm saying here is that black children in care didn't exist in a vacuum, and it's not just about the white social worker and the white carer. There's other people like teachers have a role to play, and there's probation service, there's yacht, there's the police, with the overrepresentation of stop and search in relation to young black boys and so on. But in terms of the identity work, what we did, we felt at the time that you had to have a social worker, black social worker who had an in-depth knowledge of the community to do this work. And I've been teaching Black Caribbean history, African history, and Black American history for a while. We also decided that we had some very good white social workers in our team, so we also did joint work with them. But what we did, we commenced with life storybook work. And at the time, the West Indian world had some books. So if you had a child who was Barbadian heritage, we'd show them the Barbados book. It's a very colorful book with a lot of information in it. So we had the Barbados book, the Guyana book, the Jamaica book. So this is one of the resources that we use. There was also a woman called Verna Wilkins who had written a lot of some books, and Joyce Maximi, the psychologist, was around, and she wrote Black Like Me. So we use these things and we explore family ties, because sometimes you could get a dual situation where the mother could be from Barbados, but the father is Jamaican. So you have to explore both culture. Just like with mixed children of mixed parentage, we always say we need a balanced bicultural approach. There need to be respect for the white culture and there need to be respect for the black culture. Unfortunately, in Birmingham at the time, because we had the uprisings, there was not a lot of respect coming to the black community at the time. We then talk about historic perspective, and we look at black inventors, black pioneers, black scientists. Unfortunately at the time we had to turn to America, looking at Martin Luther King and Matt Edison and all of these people, and Benjamin Banneker, who built Washington, because we didn't have a lot of role models at the time. But I said I was given an award in 2022, and I was speaking to one of the black MPs, and I said, look, we don't have to turn to America anymore. We got enough positive role models in the UK, so that's where we are. In terms of what we did, we look at videos, black books, jigsaw, puzzles, and maps, because if we could find a map of the Caribbean island which the children come from, they could have a map in the room. For all the children, we did experiential work. And what we did here, I took a young black girl to Anzert, got into a shop, and I showed her something, and she said, it's a piece of stick, and I said, no, it's sugar cane. But she didn't know it was sugar cane. Then we took her into a restaurant, and she said, is that Cornish pasty? And I said, no, that's a Jamaican patty. I got lots of credit, street credit in Birmingham again, when one boy who is now a journalist, I took him to Aston Villa, and he met some of the England players. He told me that when he went back to school on Monday morning, his street kid had risen that high. And he only told me that 2 years ago when he interviewed me. So we did a lot of experiential work. I remember coming to Southall with an Asian kid and took him around Southall. So these are some of the things that we did. The only problem with the black identity work, if you're going to do it, you need all parties, the social worker, the policymakers, everybody to be in agreement, because when you do the first session and you go back to do the second session, sometimes the child is hiding, because what Julie said, they said to the child, well, we love you, is not that enough. So you had that problem where there was a lot of resistance to us doing black identity work. I'll leave that there anyway, because I think I've said enough, but there's other things that to do. And I think the time limit, from my experience, would be 9 to 12 months to do black and cultural identity work. I don't know if it's being done now. Is it being done now, audience?
Kind of.
In some areas they're consistent, not everywhere.
We'll come back to that, because I'm taking a holistic approach to black children in care. I'm not just looking at the foster carer and the social worker. We need to look at wider society. And some of you is in core groups, and who are in core groups? Teachers, yacht team is in core groups, sometimes a police officer and so on. They also have a role, not just a social worker and not just a carer. But we'll leave that for now.
Can I go back to that question? I don't want you to leave that just yet. Because you said that when you started the work with the young person, if the other team members, professionals, weren't on board with it, the young person would start to hide and not want to come to their cultural identity workshops. Yeah. How did you overcome that? Or how did the young person then engage again, or did they not?
Well, what we did, we decided that we had to do some work with the carers and the social workers because there was this denial and people, at the time, race was a taboo subject, and I think race is still a taboo subject 40 years on. So it was an issue about, they were in denial. So what I did, I found appropriate black materials to take to I'll give you an example. I had 2 children. They were twins, but they were partially sighted. When I got to visit, I said to the mom that we need to do some cultural identity work, we need to do some work. She got into a uproar and she says to me, the mother is mentally ill, she's in all saints, I'm looking after the children, I'm doing my best. How dare you come and sort of criticize me? So I said, I'm not criticizing. I said, the ear need to be plot, and I said, you need to sort of buy something for the skin. But she wouldn't have any of it because she felt that she had rescued these children because their mom were mentally ill, and then I came along and was criticizing. So I said, I'm not criticizing. What I'm saying is that these children are partially sighted. When they're going down the road, they haven't got walking sticks. So nobody recognized that they're partially sighted. I said, what do they recognize? She wouldn't answer. So I said, they're black. The 2 of them are black. And you're not recognizing their blackness. So we did work through that one, and it was a very successful case.
And then, as a lecturer at the Polytechnic or the Birmingham University, you would set the exam papers for the aspiring social workers. Yeah. And I remember reading, one of the questions that you set was, all children are the same and colour doesn't matter. Discuss.
That was about the colour-blind approach, because black children in care have additional needs that stem from their race, culture and position in British society. And those needs are on 2 levels, physical and emotional. And I set the question because what I wanted the student to do is look at Clark and Clark famous studies in 1939, the famous Dahl test. The Dahl test was replicated by David Miller in 1975, repeated in 1985. I got it here, but basically what Miller concluded that black British children were in denial, and they were rejecting their own group and moving towards a dominant group, because when Milner did this study in 83, and he did a Dahl test, and he said, what Dahl look like you? 48% Caribbean children was misidentifying, about 28 Asian children was misidentifying, most of the white children was identifying with the right Dahl. So when I set the question, I was looking for those answers. And there was another question to outline the development of the Rastafarian movement from 1920 to the present day. And that came around because there was a lot of Rastafarian children in care. And people were taking their needs into account either. But the first question, Julie, it was really about teaching the students that they need to stop taking this colorblind approach. All children are the same and color matter, because it does matter.
Agreed? Okay. And then, if you can tell, Steve is very studious. Very studious, and he writes a lot of papers. So I was privileged, I'm honoured to actually read your book and then speak to you several times over Zoom whilst he was in Spain. So I've learned, so I'm just sharing what I've been learning as well. So Steve also wrote an article in the Adoption Journal in 1987. It was entitled West Indies, Aiming at Foster Care and Adoptive Carers, Looking After Black Children.
Yes, this paper was specifically for foster adoptive carers working with black children. If you go again, where we got
this one. Yeah. What was the article about? Why did you write it?
This is very interesting, and I'm still upset about this. I was invited to go to a conference in Swanwick in Derbyshire in 1987. I got to the conference, 3-day conference. And on the title of the conference was Dire Straits Black Children in Care. Ellen Kennedy was there, I think she's now a baroness. John Fitzgerald, a well-known social worker, writer, was there. After the first day of the workshop, nothing was discussed about black children in care. In the evening, everybody seemed to spend a lot of time in the pub. So I got up in the plenary like this, on the next morning and they said, we're here to discuss black children in care. And so far there is little discussion. Then all I heard from one person, oh, I'm from Jersey, there's no black children. I'm from Guernsey, there's no black children. I said, what are you doing here then? Why did you come to this conference? So it was like an holiday. So I challenged them, and after that, nobody spoke to me for the next 2 days. But the editor of the Adoption Journal was very brave. She came up to me and said, can you write a piece on the history of black Caribbean children in the UK? So let me give you an extract from what I wrote, because it's very important. I used Afro-Caribbean at the time. This was 1987. We didn't get to African yet. But anyway, it says there, working with black children whose parents came from the Caribbean requires some knowledge of the West Indies. In order to understand and meet the needs of African Caribbean children in care, it's very important for the carer to have a basic understanding of the parent cultures and the historical background. All through the 1950s and 60s, British industry was plagued by a shortage of labour. With economic expansion, physically arduous jobs with low pay and antisocial hours became increasingly less attractive to the British worker. This created a vacuum which was mostly filled by black workers. The presence of minority ethnic groups in Britain and their interaction with social services have raised many questions about traditional social work values and methods. This in turn has implications for service delivery to minority groups where the need arises. During the 1960s and 70s, a large number of African Caribbean children were received into care by local authorities. Many reasons have been put forward to explain this phenomenon. One of them was the unavailability of traditional methods of support for their parents, such as extended family, and a lot of us know that we were brought up by aunts and uncles and grandparents in the Caribbean. That was missing, one of the things that missing. In Britain, parenting was seen as more individualistic task. Labels such as inadequate, uncaring, or good were given according to perceived parenting capacity. Other explanations locate the problem in inferior childcaring practices, cultural conflicts between parents and children, which was a big one at the time, and some workers feeling an opinion that black people were often based on racist assumptions. The colorblind approach and blaming the victim were prevalent during this period. I will just end it by saying that the paper went on to talk about race and religion in the Caribbean. It went on to talk about cultural characteristic and background. And in the paper, I made sure I mentioned the other Caribbean islands because we got 14 main Caribbean islands, and I saw social inquiry reports at the time, and they make out that everybody was from Jamaica. And Mr. and Mrs. Williams from St. Vincent were from Jamaica. All that is wrong because you're disrespecting the other Caribbean islands. But anyway, a part of the paper, I finished by saying, in the 1960s and 70s, the reunion of children with their parents in Britain after a long separation led to difficulties of adjustment, not only to a new society in which they were very conspicuous minority, but also to a new family situation with perhaps a new step-parent, new sibling, and no extended family to cushion the hardships. These were all stress factors. And there's lots of people have told me about their experience when they arrive to find that their parents are divorced and they got into a step-parent relationship. They end up in the care system, and a lot wasn't thought of the black family at the time, and it created a lot of problems.
So you were really writing solutions.
Yes, I was, because what I had said, it's not with me critically analysing black social workers, white social workers and carers, and not offering any solutions. I think I need to say at this point, because I think sometimes there's this thing, where the white workers are doing everything wrong, the white carers are doing it. It's not like that. There was, in our community, we weren't getting it right either. I'll give you an example. A young black mother was going into hospital. She was a Rastafarian, and we placed 2 children, 3 and 6, with this black woman, and the children got to the door, and the woman turned around and said, I don't want these children here with their dirty locks. This was a Caribbean woman. So I went to the house and I said to her, you can't do this is not right. She said, I don't mind you coming in your suit and tie with your hair well trimmed. And what we did, we struck her off. Because we remember Nelson Mandela said, I'll fight white domination, but I will also fight black domination. We had a situation here where the Rastafarian community was a minority in a minority and being discriminated. So I think me and my colleagues got a lot of credit because we did that, because we weren't having any bad practice, whether it was black or white. So we did that at the time. We struck her off the list for what she did.
So the work you did was very holistic. It wasn't the black people against the white people. It was let's all be inclusive and do this together, right?
Yes, because what was happening, when I got there with all of this black experience, I didn't know much about the adoption procedures. So the senior white social worker, he said, look, we need to do a trade-off here. I will teach you about the procedures, and you take me to answer it to the black community. So it was a shared experience. So everything was really negative. You know, we come on to John Small, and what happened. I don't know if you're ready for me to say anything.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, John Small, who was one deputy director, his photo is on there with my photo. I think I'm privileged to be up there with him. But John was at the New Black Families Unit in London, and he wrote a paper called Crisis and Adoption. And what he actually said, there was a one-way traffic of black children into white families, and this begged the question about power and ideology in society. And the black community was being used as a donor group for white society, and that was accepted by a lot of people. They got angry about it. But what John said at the time was the fact that there was a school of thought in social work where, say me and Julie, right, we had a child. Our child could replace translation in a white family, but there was no black children. There were no white children being placed. The black children being placed with white families. If a black child was placed with a white family, it would be very, very short, and they remove the child as soon as possible. So what was happening, I've seen matching placements where they get everything right, white Roman Catholic child, white Roman Catholic family, but the same thing wasn't happening for black children in care. So that led a lot of community activists like John Small and black social workers to actually start questioning the system. And it didn't go down well at all. There was a lot of battles being fought up and down the country at the time.
So we're going to stay on that point where you said there was a lot of black social workers who became activists. We know of one, but he's not here today, and his name is Wayne Reed. So he wrote in the British Association of Social Workers Journal, and he said, social work is institutionally racist, and there has been a lack of explicit action to tackle this post-George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. In your opinion, does this have an impact on how black children and young people are seen and cared for within children's social care, based on what Wayne Reed said in 2021?
Wayne was right. It's institutional racist, and it came from the definition of McPherson. Because as I said, I was also an equalities officer. So in my role as director of Milton Keynes Race Equality Council, I met McPherson. And McPherson was talking about this thing about one bad apple in the police force. But let me give you the definition of institutional racism before I explain. Institutional racism is a collective failure to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, and ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behavior which result in discrimination, unwitting prejudice, ignorance, and thoughtlessness which disadvantage black and minority people. Social services would not accept the definition. I was in my principal officer's role when I present the McPherson report, the 70 recommendations. They didn't accept the 70 recommendation. They didn't accept that they were institutionally racist. What has happened, we talk about Children Act 1989, section 22.5c, that talk about race, relation, and language. That only got there because of people like me and John. That only got there. They didn't just put it there, we forced them to put it there. But the 70 recommendation that McPherson wrote would have benefited public bodies because recommendation 67 to 70 talk about the role of education. And we know about the issues around school. One of his recommendations also asks the police and public bodies to look at cultural diversity and the national curriculum. If they had done that, we'd know how Black history being taught in schools. So those was rejected. Another thing that was rejected, that McPherson asked the police and public bodies to review racial awareness training, and they didn't. I actually trained the Bedfordshire police. It was very uncomfortable, but they were polite, not like some of my colleagues. Some of my colleagues were put through the mill when after the death of Steve Lawrence, and we went around sort of, with the McPherson report. So that's what happened. So there's a lot of opportunities that have been missed. After Stephen died, the Race Relation Amendment Act 2000 came out. All public bodies were given a duty to promote race equality. Not a missed opportunity, because if they're taking on some of the stuff in that act, it would filter down and benefit Black children directly or indirectly. So we got all these opportunities being missed. The Human Rights Act got certain sections in it. The Convention on the Rights of the Child got certain sections in it. So sometimes when these local authorities come in and say, we don't understand this and we don't understand it, it's not true. In one of my jobs, I wrote 40 guidance notes. I wrote guidance notes on everything. You take the protected characteristics in the Equality Act. I write guidance notes related to the LGBT community, gender, disability, ageism. But people want to take ownership. And another thing, we had a period when we had to do this race equality scheme. In my local authority, guess what? Can you guess what they call the race equality scheme? Anybody can give me a guess? They call it Steve's report. So there's no ownership of the policy. So that's where we were at the time, and I'm not sure where we are now.
Wow. So, fast forward to present day. In your opinion, what does children's social care need to do to make changes for Black children in the care
first
system?
thing they need to do is, it's got to be mandatory training. People think about this cultural competence training. I think what the part that people missing, we're talking about Black children in care, okay? So we're talking about race equality. But nobody wants to discuss race because it's still a taboo subject. So people talk about equality and diversity. They're using all sorts of language, they're circling around it, but nobody wants to admit. If you're dealing with Black children in care, Black mixed heritage children in care, you're really talking about race equality. So I think they've got to let the training for social workers, carers mandatory. That's one of the first things that they need to do. I also think they should revisit the McPherson report, the 70 recommendations. They should also revisit the duty to promote race equality, because when those duties came out, the Commission for Racial Equality, my friend Lord Woolsey, who I work with a lot, he had a quality standards called race equality means quality, and it went from level 1 to level 5. Councils would get level 1, the policies, level 2, statement of intent, and as soon as you get to level 3, implementation, and put in some money in the Black communities, councillors start rejecting it. So a lot of opportunities been missed. So I'm surprised when I'm hearing about all the excuses. We'd have gone further and we'd have done better for Black children in care if people were more positive. But what happened in 1989, we had Paper 30. That was part of the social work, Annex 5. Paper 30 was talking about social workers got to work ethnically and culturally sensitive, and they got to develop policies because Black students was in the universities challenging them. But Paper 30 was rejected. So Paper 30 didn't actually got on the agenda. And I know where Wayne Reed is coming from, because he's ended up in that system now, and he's seen what me and Dr. Carver Anderson saw in the 80s. Because in the 80s we were called to Kent Street, Boswell headquarters, and we were doing talks there and so on. But it looks as if we have gone backwards.
Wow. So, I've 2 more questions, and then we're going to open the floor. What advice would you give to aspiring social workers, newly qualified and qualified?
Newly qualified, are they in university or they're out of university?
Anyone.
One of the things I would like to say to aspiring social workers, if you're going to a university or education institute, you're not going there as no race expert, remember that. You are going there to learn. And when I studied, there was 5 base subjects that you have to pass to get into the second year. Politics, psychology, economics, English, social history, and law, and something else. But if you didn't pass those, you were out anyway. So my advice would pass your exam, pass your placements, behave in a professional way when you're in the setting, if you're a job. And remember, if you see something and you're racially abused, then go to the right authorities and try to deal with it. Because remember, when you start criticizing other professionals about their practice about race, they will look at you sometimes and they say your report writing is not good enough. Your punctuality is not good enough. So if you're going to be a professional person, then you have to cover a broad spectrum. Because one thing happened with me, although they didn't like where I was coming from, they respected me because nobody ever sacked me. What they used to do, when there was a round of spending cuts and they were getting rid of 100 social workers, they get rid of me then because they couldn't get rid of me on my own because they know I take them to tribunal. So they done it in a clever way. But all through my career, you know, I've always made a stand. It has gone on well sometimes, but I don't regret anything.
And then our last question is, what message would you give to Black care experienced children and young people?
You doesn't exist in a vacuum. You're part of the wider society. And as I said before, there's some elements that need to look after you. There's, in the schools, Black children are seen as a problem. We got the community to prison pipeline that some of people have ended up in. So you don't exist in a vacuum. There's a group of people that need to look after you and they need to take their responsibility seriously. You yourself, try and get an education. I know it's difficult sometimes when you've been in the care system, because the last time I read something, it said 13% of children in care only get grade A to C in their O levels and so on. But it's really about getting an education, because once you have like that DPSW, they can't stop you. People are like you, but there's a shortage of social workers in England and Wales. I've been offered 25 jobs since I left for Spain. Every day they're phoning me to come back in. I'm not coming back. So that's what I would say. I know it's difficult because it depends on your background and where you're coming from. But I've had people who have really done well. I know I mentioned I use celebrities, and I can say this because it is in the book now, but one of the celebrities, that person that helped me, he was helping me a lot, you know. And one day he said to me, Steve, I've been in care, I used to be in foster care in London. It happened to be Cyril Regis, the great footballer. Cyril was in care. So even him, and I won't call the other names, but I've had several people who have done well. You know, being in care, come out of care. We have 1 year, Judith. Round of applause. So
It wasn't easy.
it's not all negative, and we need to remain positive. And I know sometimes, you know, people go on about race, but it's not just about race, because I was managing the Malcolm X Center in Bristol, and when they came to close down the place, BBC came and interviewed me, and the journalist said, I understand that people say it's racism, and I turned to him and I said, listen, race is a part in things, but I said, in this instance, we need to get our house in order, because what had happened was successful manager went in there and ran down the Malcolm X Center. It's about managing the finance there. Because if you're a manager, you're managing finance, and you're managing people, you're managing things. So whilst race is there, I don't use it all the time. If something is really serious, I will go for it. But at the same time, you know, we are in the society, we're in a European country, and we still need to get on with people. And you need to make allies. There's a lot of positive white people that I've worked with over the years. It's not all negative. I know sometimes, because I took the stand in Birmingham, people may say it's just radicalism. And the last thing I'd say to you, and it's in my book, being anti-racist does not mean being anti-white. But I won't explain, you can read my book. Thank you.
Give him a round of applause. Wow. Actually, I got one more question. Just the final question, then we'll open the floor. So do you think, is love really enough to change things?
No, it's not enough. It's important. When you're in the family, one-to-one with the foster care, it's very important. But we got the wider society. And as I said before, if black children in school are seen as a problem, that's an issue. If they're walking down the street, we all know about stop and search. That's the police role. The criminal justice system, also in the public sector, have a major part to play. So no, love is not enough. Love is not enough at all. It needs more than love. But at the same time, love is also important. I would just like to end anyway. I want to quote Nelson Mandela. And I just say here, we are not where we want to be, but at least we're not where we used to be. Thank you.
So, any questions from the audience? Does anyone? Where are my assistants today? They're in another room. Just need a roaming mic.
Got a dual role here today. So who would like to go first?
Okay.
Hand up at the back.
Yeah.
So then we'll come
And then we'll come to the front. The young lady at the back. And if you could say your name as well, is that okay?
Hi, my name is Bashi, or at least that's what I go by. My actual name is Bashiva. I'm sorry.
Could we stand up, please, Bashi?
Yeah, sure.
Woo! Give a round of applause.
So I'm a creative artist, usually by trade, producer. I produce on theatre in West End. I'm a caregiver. I've got my own theatre company, and one of the things that we're focused on, for example, is the fact that there's a lot of children that are not in employment educational training. Especially black children, obviously. I guess my question to you is one of the things that we've come across is looking at you're saying, well, this is a village and it takes a village to raise a child. I guess part of the village for me is that being care experience myself, social workers on, and I guess the entire community, the things that they teach in terms of financial literacy and things like that, they're, I guess, not helpful.
Yeah, what can the wider community do?
Yeah, to help.
No, I think one of the youth service has been decimated because at one point there was a lot of good youth workers that were helping people. Unfortunately, in terms of our wider community, we are the Windrush generation which have passed on, and I was second generation, was quite active, but unfortunately, a lot of people didn't follow us, so it's very, very difficult. But one of the places where we had a lot of support, would you believe it, is in the cricket clubs. Because in the cricket clubs, you are probably 60 men and 60 women. And it wasn't just about playing cricket. The cricket clubs were like banks. They had, in a cricket club, you had engineers, electricians, plumbers, and people help each other. That's one place where a lot of support been given. Because I remember when the Pyroclastic covered Montserrat, and we took in all the cricketers from Montserrat, and they actually got into the system because of that. So I don't know, because it's 32 boroughs in London, if you're from London, I don't know what's happening in London, but on the ground, we haven't got a lot of activists that we used to have. It's really a difficult situation. You know, so I wouldn't say I have the answers, but you need to try and find the right people to help you along. But it's a difficult one, and I wouldn't say I have all the answers.
Brilliant. Another question? Wow, we've got lots, but not much time. Yeah. Donna, if you want to go to, Millie. Millie?
Hi, I am a massive fan of radical social work. So when you talk about radical social work,
Really, can we stand up?
I'm very much of a fan of going back to radical social work. When you talk about institutions and what we need to do to enhance the practice and anti-racist practice of social workers and the police and our education providers, I do a lot of work around anti-racist practice. I'm an anti-racist strategic lead in Brighton. And I am, not to use it against people, but I'm just wondering what your view is. We have something called the Equality Act. Everyone talks a lot about the protected characteristics. And when I'm doing training, I try and get people to think about the fact that it is legislation. So actually, are we doing a good enough job if we are focusing on all those protected characteristics and acting within the law when we actually are not comfortable or able to talk about race?
But remember, it's not protected characteristic in the act. And as a social worker, I work with all the protected characteristics. But one thing you must remember, race covers five characteristics. So you could have a black elderly woman who's a member of a Pentecostalist church, and she's also disabled. That's 4 characteristics. So the race covers most of the characteristics, because you could have young people who are part of the LGBT community, and so on. So I think that's the way you need to play. But what they have done with the equality, they have subsumed race under the act. And most of the jobs I've seen is equality included and diversity. And some of these officers in those posts, it look like they're scared to talk about race.
That's it, that's my point.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're talking about. I focus on all of those protected characteristics through an intersectional lens.
Yeah.
You could have someone who's black, who's LGBT, who identifies as LGBTQ+, who is a woman, who's a man, whatever it might be. So it's important to look at it through those intersectional lenses. But rightly, when you're talking about equality, diversity and inclusion in EDI, people are often thinking about those protected characteristics through a white lens. So I use those protected characteristics through the white lens, but actually bring it to people through that black lens. Okay, you're talking about white people through that EDI lens. What about black people who've got all these protected characteristics? What did your services look like for them?
You know, I'm a bit strong about it, because when I was director of the Race, Equality and Human Rights Service, it was through the lens of race we were speaking. Obviously, sometimes a white person might turn up on a doorstep and they got a discrimination issue. And if you can help, you help and you deal with it. But at the same time, you can't let them push off the focus. It's a legal duties there, but what you have to do is go back to the 2000 Act, the duty to promote race equality, because it's part of legislation. You use the 2000 Act, the duty that we came out in 2001. You need to get back to that. And don't let the sidetrack you. You see, one of the things is sometimes when people are in local government, I used to be in an office, civic offices, where people just walk past me and they don't speak to me, you know, because of the stand I made. But it didn't bother me at all. But you know, something strong. Some people going into these public bodies looking for friends. If you're going to look for friends, then you're not going to be a good anti-racist advocate. I'm not saying you, but it's just one of them things. If you understand the legislation inside out and you understand where you're coming from, then you can let people take ownership. You know, you just have to let, you know, people understand. When I was in Bristol, Marvin Rees, the mayor, when he was actually in my team at one time, and Marvin was always going about class. I said, Marvin, class is important. I'm not saying that important, but you're not talking about race. But that's where he was at the time. Obviously, he's gone on further now. But sometimes people get sidetracked, and people sidetrack you sometimes. But you just have to be strong.
Brilliant. Okay, I know there's lots of questions, but we're going to go into a workshop. So we're going to come back to the questions at some point today. Is that okay? Please write them down in your notebooks and then hand them in to us. And then somewhere we will make sure we answer those questions. Is that okay?
Is that David?
I don't know. Okay, right. So, workshops are... before we go into this workshop, Steve has not been expecting this, but what we've done at the Black Care Experience, we've got him an award. And I'm going to read it. Everyone's standing up. And it says, the Black Care Experience, Culture, Identity and Heritage. To Steve Stephenson MBE, Social Worker, Race. Trailblazing change for Black children and young people in children's social care. We want to thank you so much for what you started in the 1980s. You can take that home. Thank you so much.
Simone, you want to come in the picture? Come on.
This is his daughter. So I see Simone to come. Simone, come in the picture. She said no. Simone, you should be part of it because you were part of the modelling campaign. They modelled your braids so that they can know how to raise us.
Okay.
But thank you so much because when we started the work in 2020, I didn't know that what was happening back then was happening. I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And little by little, people began to give me pieces of information.
Okay.
And then we've also got some of the participants from the White Nighty Black Child in the room. Where are you? Gloria and Remy. If you saw them on TV. And Yuandi. So when I was invited to the screening, I broke down in tears because I was thinking I wrote about this but didn't know it was real. So it's nice to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And then when I got the phone call the back end of last year that says, hey, there's this guy called Steve Stephenson, I was like, where? To hear about what you guys did, because sometimes I feel like giving up. But when you have allowed me to just chat to you via Zoom and call you in Spain and just say, so what happened here? It validates that we're not making up the story. It's actually real. And I thank you so much for flying out and coming across. Do you want to respond?
Yes. Thanks very much. I'm a bit humiliated. but thanks very much. I really appreciate this after so many years. And I know Dr. Carver Anderson would be pleased and the other people in the team. But I just want to say something just to connect with people. Because I know sometimes you're doing things and you're helping young people and you think there's no benefit. One of the boys from the youth club, Fennel John, he's the boy that danced with Kylie Minogue, okay? 2 black guys used to dance with her. He's one of them. And I told him to go into property. He's now a millionaire. And just one more, I remember, I went to Kingston, the poorest club in Kingston in 1994, gave 1,000 worth of gears to some young people. One boy got a bat. Can anybody guess who that boy is? Chris Gale got a bat. Chris Gale is now a multimillionaire. He got a bat from me when he was 14. So sometimes you do little things and you bear the fruits years after. So continue your work, continue helping. Okay?
Thank you. I'll put it in here. All right. So over to our workshop for everyone. So I want you to get yourselves in groups of 10. Normally we'd give you the groups, but we're going to see if you can manage, well, you can manage to do this. If you get into groups of 10, and if you are a Black Care Experience care leaver in the group, and you're in the group, this is where we're going to listen to you today. As a Black Care Experience care leaver, or if you're still in care or care leaver, what one thing would you have liked your social worker or your foster carer to do to help you understand your culture, your identity and heritage?
Came through, and that was about storytelling and narratives, but also relatability. I think that the message was coming through was that people wanted to be given the tools to tell their own story, even if they had to learn that through hearing the stories of others or learn together with their carers. I hope I'm doing that justice. But I feel like that came out over here. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Fantastic.
From this conversation. We need to do better as a whole. We all need to do better, the system needs to do better. What really came out was the importance of listening to young people, listening to their stories, listening to who they are, and empowering them beyond any stereotypes or prejudices that we have, seeing who they are, listening to who they are, and allowing them to flourish into their beautiful, beautiful black souls.
Brilliant, thank you.
From what I was listening to, I found, again, that resonance around the family network, and obviously the young lady Lorraine, from what I heard, was saying actually this person was available to me, but initially they looked for a foster carer first, rather than really mapping that network around her. I would say it really highlights that sort of village mentality, family group conferencing, and the need for really making sure the network is checked, and also around identity and remaining connected.
We had 4 care experience, wonderful young people in our group, and the overall message really I think that we got from them was that helping them to prepare for the next phase of their life and their journey in leaving the system. So one of the things that came out very, very strongly, and we kind of echo with someone at the back there, was about food and the importance of children knowing what their cultural dishes are. There's a sort of a bit of a story, there's a bit of a narrative that takes place around food, and when food is served, and so on and so on. And we also got that actually visiting, if at all possible, actually visiting your country of birth, and actually seeing firsthand, what it's like, what happens there, just really immersing themselves in their actual, country of birth was something that they felt was really important, and that this should happen sort of incrementally, sort of at different stages of the journey, but the earlier the better, so that there is this link with, that's who I am, that's where I'm from. So that's really what we got.
We are called Care Experienced. I was in foster child, I was then adopted, and I think be sort of like sensitive here, be interesting to know what other people think. I get a bit wounded every time I hear the word care experienced, because I'm not care experienced. I am a child. I identify as a dad, and I identify as a husband, I identify as a son, and stuff like that. No other term do I ever hear anybody identifying themselves as experienced. They're not experienced. As a grandparent, I'm grandparent experienced. Or if you're in a hospital, I'm a health worker experienced. So I really get wounded when I hear it, because I feel that it dehumanises my identity as a kid that grew up, wasn't able to grow up with my birth parents, but had to grow up with another family, and carry on using it under pressure now. But just be aware that when you're chucking these sort of like disconnected labels at all of us to say you are care experienced, that is, I am not care experienced. I am actually just a kid that wasn't able, to whatever reason, live with his birth mum and birth dad.
Thank you very much. And just to echo that, I'm also care experienced. People that didn't know, but I don't see that as a label. I just say that was a part of my journey, and now I've moved on. So I tap back into it because of the young people that I mentored who were still in the care system. But I say to them, that's just part of your journey. That's not your story. You were just there. Now you're moving on to become the person that you will become, and you can use that part of your story if you want to help other young people know what you've been through, so that they can be inspired, like Steve has told us, to allow them to move forward. That's just a takeaway from me. But I think the takeaway from me, for everyone, not just for me, but for everyone in the room, is to say that it's really important to understand that every single child in the care system, whether they're black, you've got white, Asian, wherever they come from, we're all individual. We all have our own journeys. We will all have our own experiences. It's not a one-size-fits-all children's social care approach to raise us. And the exercise we did today is listen to us. And when you listen to us, you might be given a bit more work to do, maybe, but it will help us in the long run. Because we're only in the system until we're 18, basically. So whatever you put into us at this point in time, as we come through the care system, is going to show up in us when we're older. So make sure, like we've done today, that we listen and stay in tune to what our young people are going through, because it will help massively. Okay?